Great.
All right, Charles, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Thank you, Tom. And I'm enjoying watching your videos, by the way. And I just want to start by saying that you're very unusual in this effort, in that I've interviewed people over the years on issues of religion and politics. And oftentimes people come at it with a kind of, not an anger, but like an agenda. And you actually are a nice guy, so I appreciate that. You seem to be genuinely interested in thoughtful talk. So
thank you.
And I guess that, well, I'm the author of many books. I've been doing talk radio in Greater Boston off and on for many, many years. And recently I've launched my own online show, Charles Moscowitz Live. And I'm doing it on various platforms, the main one being Rumble, where I like to interview people who have opinions from all sides in politics, in religion, in economy, in culture. And I do it every night, 10 to midnight live, Monday through Friday.
Cool.
Yep.
So what did you want to chat about today?
Well, I mean, I am interested in your preposition, is there a God and is there evidence of God? And I just, I have a lot of thoughts about that. And I tend to approach the issue. First of all, I'm not a theologian. I'm not a rabbi. I'm not a Jewish studies or a religious studies major in college or anything like that. So I come at this, as a sort of a layman, and I speak only for myself, even though I'm not a traditional Jew, but I'm more of a secular American Jew who has become a bit more traditional as I've gotten older. So that's the perspective I come at it from. And so from that perspective, I would present two ideas. What I perceive to be the Jewish concept of a God, and also the secular American concept of a God. First of all, from the Jewish concept, we don't try to prove there's a God. We don't try to look for evidence on the earth that there is a God. We believe there's a God. We run under the assumption that there's a God, and we strive to try to understand what that means. But the idea of proving God, it actually is a contradiction in terms, because we live in the natural world. We're natural beings. Whereas the idea of a God is supernatural. So, to try to prove the supernatural in the natural world is not only a contradiction in terms, but it kind of violates the basic Jewish understanding, which is that to do so borders on, if not is, idol worship, which is something that we're warned against in the Torah. That people who try to say, well, this is God, they're the people that set up graven images like Moloch, and they're throwing live babies in the belly of a burning furnace to appease that God. That this is an arrogant and wrong idea. You cannot create a God or prove there's a God, because God is outside of the natural world. We can only deal with what we know to be true in the natural world. That's what science is. It's an objective understanding of the nature of existence and the nature of the world, and in the sense of the more hard sciences. So I don't seek to prove there's a God, and I don't seek to show evidence there's a God. I assume there's a God, and I see God in various elements of human nature that are what I would describe as unnatural. And the main one in Jewish understanding that suggests that there's a God is the idea of charity. When you do charity and you give something to another person or another group that doesn't benefit you, that doesn't seem to run as a natural phenomena. That's something that is almost supernatural. And thus we tend to look at that as, not evidence, but that is a suggestion that there is something greater to our lives and to existence.
Wait, what? Could you explain that more? What is supernatural? So the first thing, actually, you said that be a contradiction in trying to prove God because the scientific natural world is natural and God is supernatural. I don't think that doesn't seem to make sense. Like we can show the existence of supernatural things just fine as long as they interact in the natural world. So like I could say, if there was a supernatural spirit named Bob who was living in my basement, and I prayed to this Bob and he gave me a gold brick every time I prayed to him, that would be evidence of the supernatural existence of Bob. So you don't need, like, the fact that there are supernatural things doesn't mean that science can't investigate them. Science can investigate them if they interact with the natural world. So there wouldn't be any contradiction. There's no logical contradiction with demonstrating supernatural things exist.
Well, first of all, that supernatural being in your basement isn't going to give you a brick. I mean, that's not, unless you're insane, the supernatural doesn't reach out from the supernatural world and do something in the natural world that we know of. I mean, it's not something that, I'm not saying it couldn't happen because I have no idea, but generally speaking, we are dealing on the natural plane. We understand what is, and that not only is the material world, but it's also we deal with abstract realities that we can identify, and we can do so through abstract sciences such as mathematics. But I want to also, if you don't mind, I want to move on to my secular understanding of God. And that is found in the founding of the American Republic, that our republic is based upon an assumption of God. And what I point to on that is the founding document of the American Republic, the Declaration of Independence, which was, of course, signed in July 4th, 1776, where Thomas Jefferson says that he views it as self-evident that we're endowed by the Creator. Now, the Creator, in the American sense, is not a denominational God like a Jesus or an Allah or anything else. It is a universalist view that there is a creator of the universe, which is completely consistent with the Jewish and the Torah view, and that is this creator, this existence of a supernatural entity outside of human manipulation is what grants us rights. And Jefferson specifically delineates those rights as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that this is the political philosophy that serves as the foundation of the United States. Now, of course, we don't always practice it. We're not always aware of it. That's beside the point. The fact is that this idea that rights come from a creator and not from the state, not from the man-made natural state, is something that has separated us from all other nations. It's something that is consistent with the Bible because the Torah says that God created men and women in his image did he create them. So it evaluates every single human life, because if we're images of God, whatever that means, and that's a mystery, then therefore every single human life has an intrinsic value. And the Talmud tells us that every life almost is like a universe in of itself, and that and from that we understand that the function of government, the function of society, is to preserve, protect, and defend those rights that were given by the Creator. This also contradicts the other mention in the Declaration of Independence, which is that all men are created equal. That is also a biblical concept that in a way runs against the natural understanding, which is that we're not created equal. The idea that every human being is born equal, we die equal, we have an equal spirit, we have equal rights under God. We're not, it's not a issue of de facto equal because we have different talents and different luck and all of that. It is an idea that emanates from a belief in God, because if you look at the natural approach, the Darwinian approach, we're not equal. We are at different rungs in an evolutionary chain. I mean, Darwin viewed in his book, Descent of Man, that, for example, the English were more evolved than the Scotch and the Irish, and that he viewed the Aboriginal people of Australia as closer in evolution to the ape than to the human. And so if you accept, and that actually is quite consistent with a natural understanding of the world, that we aren't all equal, that we're all different, and that there's we're evolving ultimately into an outward crop of superior species or race, as Darwin called it. So the American, to put it in a nutshell, the American political philosophy, the American political conception emanates from a belief in a creator as described in the Bible, because the idea that all men and women are created equal is something that transcends the natural world, and it's an idea that rights come from a creator as opposed to the state, is what has proven, I think, over time to foster freedom and foster individual creativity and inventiveness. So that's my thesis, Tom.
Could you summarize that in like a sentence? So you think God is just the idea that brings people a motivation to give intrinsic value to humans or something in political perspective? That's your secular view of God. And then
my secular view of God is that God exists because God upholds the concept that all men and women are created equal under God, and that rights emanate not from the state, but from a supernatural source, and thus cannot be manipulated and altered by a man-made state.
Okay, but you can have that without a God, so why would you need a God for that?
Well, I would argue you can't have that without a God, even if you don't believe in God. And by the way, the Declaration of Independence doesn't say you have to believe in the Creator. But if you assume that there is a Creator, then you can continue with or without believing in it, because it is. It's just something that exists. So, it doesn't preclude the idea that you can continue onward and not believe in it, and you can think somehow that all of the moral and ethical precepts that emanate from this idea, which is that man is created in the image of God and that we're equal, that somehow popped out of nature, if you want. But I would suggest that it's more likely that this is an aspect of a supernatural event that transcends the natural world, because if we were in the natural world, we probably ultimately wouldn't have that.
Why do you assume that? Because to me, it seems like there's no difference. It seems like it's equally as likely to have universal value without a God as with a God. You just have some kind of a natural law. Having a supernatural being wouldn't make it more likely to have value or anything. It's just you assume there is such a thing, and we can just assume there's a natural law of value or something. Like, it doesn't seem like there's any reason to prefer one hypothesis over the other. It just seems like people are making up things that make them feel good.
No, I would assume that there is a value in assuming that that rights emanate from a creator, because if you don't assume that, then you will therefore look for a source of rights, and that source of rights becomes the state, the dictator, the Führer, whatever it might be. And that if you assume that we're all at different levels of evolution, as opposed to that we're all created equal, and that, you're going to end up with people who replace the idea of a creator with this idea that they should evolve man by creating a super biological entity or a super social entity, and the only way to do that is by force.
Oh, I'm not following. So the argument here is that you claim that the idea of the secular God is that it gives us this innate value, this sense of innate value, but we can have innate value without that. We can have innate value as like a law of physics. There's innate value there or whatever. You don't need a God for that. Secondly, I don't understand your follow-up about how we would see values and other things. Like, obviously creating a better world is a good idea, but we wouldn't see objective value in the state. That doesn't seem to follow at all.
Well, creating a better world, if it's done by an individual or by a group of individuals that are devoid of an understanding that that rights come from God, they're going to believe that they can create a better world through their own imperfect and arbitrary view of what that means. And that has been the core of various movements, messianic movements, if you will, that have tried to do that, such as Nazism and communism and
humanitarianism and Red Cross and Red Shield. Like, yes, most people understand that, yeah, there isn't a God, and they try to do things just like people who think there is a God try to do things. So there's no difference there. There are many religious people who do evil things, and there are many secular people who do evil things, and there are many religious people who do good things, and many secular people who do good things. Like the fact that there's a God makes zero difference one way or the other. You're both able to do good things with or without a God. Like many of the scientists who made some of the greatest discoveries in the world were secular, and they didn't have anything to do with a God, and it made tons of difference for people all over the world. Like it doesn't seem to follow, your argument doesn't seem to make any sense that, well, you need a God to do good in the world. Like clearly not.
Well, first of all, I think most scientists, and I don't have any hard science on this, but that they do believe in God. There's a consensus, including people like Einstein and some of the great scientists of history, like Isaac Newton and Leibniz, who was the founder of calculus. These people said that their science emanated from a cause, going back to Aristotle, who talked about the primus mobile.
Well, I actually do have data on that. So Phil Survey's paper shows that the vast majority of philosophers and modern day scientists are actually atheists, and the higher up you go, the more atheist they become. So of the National Academy of Sciences and the Royal Society, the two leading scientific institutes in the world right now, only about 5% believe in a God. 95% reject or disbelieve or don't believe there's any personal entity out there. So in the past there were, but that doesn't matter. Like in the past, most farmers were Christian. That doesn't mean that it's inherently better to be a Christian farmer because Christians produce better farmers. No, it's just coincidentally the case that most people in society were religious back then. Also, Einstein did not believe in a God. He believed in pantheism kind of a thing, not actually a personal entity. He specifically said he does not believe in a personal entity.
Well, okay. I don't look. The point is that from a Jewish perspective, I suppose it doesn't matter whether you believe in a God or not. The point is that there is a God. We believe that there is a God, and that God has created the moral and ethical precepts that we live by, whether we believe they come from a divine source outside of human manipulation, or whether we want to pretend that they are something that is invented by governments or by groups who decide what is moral and what is immoral. The point is that this idea, the other aspect of creation that I should mention is once God created Adam and Eve, and again, I'm not a fundamentalist. Judaism is not fundamental. We don't necessarily believe in the literal word, but the concept that we're all descended from one father and one mother is actually something that I think there's growing numbers of scientists that believe this, and they call it the primordial Eve and the Y chromosome Adam. Putting that aside, I don't want to get into it.
Well, just to comment on that for a minute, that's not really the case. Like we think that.
Okay. Again, I don't want to debate it. I read this somewhere. I'm not claiming that I have hard evidence of that. I've heard that this is something that's out there. But the point is that what separated men and women from all other, according to biblical understanding, the moment that the soul entered the picture, what separated us from all of the living beings was our ability to reason. That is something that is unique to the human being. Animals and plants, they don't reason. They're bound to nature. They're emotional beings and they're loyal beings, but they are bound to instinct. Now, we as human beings also have that element to us, but the additional piece that makes us separate, and in a religious sense, the moment that God breathed the soul into us, was when we had the ability to reason, to understand, to analyze, to calculate, to integrate all of the elements of the universe, both physical and abstract, at least that which we have access to. And that's something that's limited, but it's something that's growing. And that the very first act of reason.
Well, again, I'm not following you. So many animals can do lots of reasoning, like crows and octopuses and dolphins. They're giving complicated problem-solving things where they have to like solve a problem to get a treat or whatever, and they can do the problem-solving required to actually open the box.
How do you know that's reason? How do you know that's not being, in a sense, imitation and being taught? I mean, they're not. I mean, can they perform a symphony? I mean, it's. In other words,
symphony doesn't equate to reasoning here. So they can be given a problem which they've never seen before. Wait. So they can be given a problem which they've never seen before, and they can figure out how to solve the problem which requires multiple variables. So it's like a box that requires you to do a certain combination of things to open the box, and they can figure it out without, they're not taught this. They're just given the box. They're given no information, and they figure it out on their own. They are able to problem solve through looking through a problem they've never seen before and do complex reasoning in order to open the box. So yes, and they can do cooperative reasoning where you have to work together to, one person does one thing or one animal does one thing on one side of the box while the other one does something else on the other side of the box. And they can recognize that you need to work together in order to open the box. They did that with elephants, where they both had to like pull a rope at the same time in order to get the treat. And if either one of them individually pull it, they'd never get the treat. And so the elephants learned to work together, and one would like hit the other one if they weren't paying attention to make them actually grab the rope, because they recognized that they needed both. So yes, animals can do reasoning just fine. They just don't do it to the same degree that we do. But I don't see what this is relevant to the point is. So let me just, my position is that there's no evidence of a God. You don't need a God for anything. Everything is better explained by naturalism, and anything that a God or religious belief can do can be achieved by a different belief that's secular and rational and doesn't have any of the supernatural mythical stuff. And so there's absolutely no benefit to a God other than the fact it's motivational for many people today. And that's the only thing that the God belief provides.
Look, I don't really know the research you're talking about with animals, and I'm not questioning it. I would simply note that it probably doesn't prove reason. It proves instinct and the survival instinct, which is part of all of us, animals and humans. But the ability to think and the ability to reason and kind of embrace conceptual ideas and advance, an understanding of morality, what is good, what is evil, that is something that I would suggest, and we may, you and I can hopefully agree to disagree, but I would suggest that that is unique to the human being, and that is something that, from a religious standpoint, is what gives us a soul, and is what makes us created in the image of God. And what happened after that is the very first thing that Adam did. And again, I'm using the Adam and Eve story metaphorically here, not literally. The very first thing that God told Adam to do was to name all of the creatures of the universe and give them, in other words, to use language. Language was a storage of value. It was a means of communication, and it was a means to categorize everything that Adam was learning in the universe. And I interviewed a couple of years ago Noam Chomsky, who was considered one of the premier linguists. We were there to talk about politics, but I also brought this up to him because he contended that language did not evolve. Language happened spontaneously. He doesn't say why or how, but his conclusion was that. And then I asked him if he felt that that was consistent with the Torah story of God giving Adam the power to name all of the things of the universe. And didn't that contradict the evolutionary theory, which says that these things evolve over millions and millions of years? And he didn't really like my thinking on that, but then we moved on to politics. But the point is that the ability to name the entities of the world that Adam had access to was the beginning of knowledge, and knowledge and the accumulation of knowledge is an element of reason.
I mean, that doesn't even make any sense from the biblical standpoint, because the beginning of knowledge is when they ate the apple.
No, that happened. That was the next step. No, I disagree. The beginning of knowledge was when God told Adam to name the creatures of the world. Then you had the apple, and that's a whole different scenario.
But again, so focus on my point. So my point is God does nothing. All it does is make people feel good. It accomplishes nothing in reality. We don't need it for anything in reality. We can accomplish everything the God belief does without the God belief, and there's no reason to believe it actually exists, because everything is better explained by naturalism.
I think that's a very arrogant view, because whether you believe in God or not doesn't negate the fact that, or the question of whether or not there is a God. It's like the question of whether or not you see a tree fall in a forest. It doesn't mean it didn't fall. You cannot believe in a God, and you could think that we're just a bag of bones and blood, and that there's no greater spiritual purpose to our lives other than to breed a superior species, which is Darwin's theory. Or you can believe that every individual is sui generis, is unique in that they are created in the image of God, and that God gave us the gift of reason.
Well, you don't need God for that. That's a common thing of what you keep saying is that, well, you need God to do this thing. And I'm like, well, no, you don't need God to do that thing. We can see everyone as sui generis, as unique, without a God. You don't need a God for that. Like you keep saying that God does this thing and you need a God for this thing, and it's just false. Like, no, we can do all of those things without God. So
How do you know?
because I can do it right now. I see you as unique.
But how do you know you're doing it without God giving you that ability?
God giving you, well, I don't need the God belief. I don't need to believe in a God to do these things.
No, you don't need to believe in God, but that doesn't mean God didn't give you that ability, whether you believe in God or not.
Right, and that's where the evidential question comes in, and we can, so evidentially, God is just a made-up hypothesis, and the better hypothesis is evolution gave us these abilities. So why would you think that God is relevant to this?
Well, let's talk about whether or not evolution gave you those abilities.
Okay.
The evolutionary theory, there are two parts to it. The first one is that somehow life sprang from non-life.
That's not evolution. That has literally nothing to do with evolution.
No, Charles Darwin referred to, he said in his journals that all of life emanated from a little warm pond where you had non-life colliding dialectically to eventually outward pop life.
Yeah, not everything Charles Darwin said has to do with the theory of evolution. The theory of evolution is change in species over time and the change in allele frequency over time. That's abiogenesis. So abiogenesis is how you got life from non-life. Those are separate theories.
That's adaptation, the change in species, which is true. But how do you explain the evolution of one species into a superior species? That is the basic Darwinian idea.
Change in allele frequency over time.
So, all right. So whatever that means, what you're saying is that one species will eventually evolve into a superior species?
Yes.
All right. Well, that does contradict the biblical understanding, which is that the species maybe adapt to different environments. Like, for example, the human species, we have different skin tones based upon living in various climates because we need to protect ourselves. So if you have somebody who lives in the Laplands of northern Norway, they have very fair skin because the sun doesn't, there's not enough sun, so they have to absorb more sun rays. Whereas if you have someone who lived near the equator, will have a darker skin to protect them from too much sun, and that that adaptation to these environmental issues over time resulted in different appearances. But that's not evolution, unless you think that some people are superior to others, which I don't. That is simply adaptation, and the same thing is true in the animal kingdom. There's an adaptation to the environment that occurs in order for a particular group of people or animals, or even plants, to survive and thrive. It doesn't mean that they're evolving into a superior species. Darwin's theory is, and you just said this, that a species actually transforms and evolves into a superior species. There's no evidence of that.
Yeah, because I was using superior as a colloquial term there to mean better at living in a certain environment. So yes, people who have darker skin tones are better at living in environments with higher radiation because their skin absorbs more of the radiation. Are they like objectively superior? No, they're just better acclimated to living in that condition. So evolution makes you better acclimated to living in a condition. Like dolphins are better swimmers than we are, so they're better at living in the ocean condition. Fish can breathe underwater, so they're better at living in the ocean conditions. So they're superior in that sense, but there's not like an objective betterment measure there.
Do you think that man evolved out of the ape?
Yes.
So then, therefore, you had a superior species. The man is superior to the ape in a lot of ways we can document. And so, the point is that runs contrary to, I think, evidence. And it certainly runs contrary to biblical understanding.
Well, it definitely goes contrary to the biblical understanding. I agree with you there, but it goes with all of the evidence. Like all of the evidence indicates
Such as?
What?
Such as? I don't think there's any evidence of that. None.
The DNA record, the retroviruses that we can literally show that where a retrovirus entered a certain species and where it translates into the future species, we can show that we're related.
That there's an evolution into another species.
Yes, it is.
How?
So if you have a genealogy, and at some point in the past, a virus, like let's use humans as an example. Let's say your great grandfather got a virus, and that virus entered into his DNA and changed his gametes, the sperm and egg cells. So this is now in all of his kids. Now, any of his kids, we can then look in their DNA and we can say, like, oh, look, they have this virus in this exact location because they got it from this grandfather that got this virus in his gametes. And we can look back in time and say, oh, look, our genes have the exact same retroviruses as the apes because we have a common ancestor of the grandfather of both of our species who got it at this point in time.
That doesn't prove anything. All that proves is that the ape got a virus and the human got a virus. It doesn't show that that the human evolved out of the ape.
So the DNA is kind of big, 3 billion or so different base pairs. So if it's in the exact same spot, and there's not just one in the exact same spot, there's hundreds in the exact same spot.
The exact same spot. I mean, you mean like in the same location that they got the virus?
Yes, like it. DNA, very long, 3 billion base pairs, all in a big line, connected.
On the same spot on the DNA.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
So retroviruses, what they do is they inject their DNA into your DNA to cause them to replicate more. And so the DNA left that's injected into your DNA is in a very specific spot. Now it's not the same every time the virus goes in. It goes in and it injects it at random different places because all it needs is to reproduce. But if it's in the exact same spot in multiple species, now it's possible it happens just by chance, but the possibility is about 1 in several hundred billion. So it's not very likely. Pretty unlikely that would occur. But the bigger problem here is that it's not just one, there's hundreds of these, there's hundreds of thousands of these retroviruses and other markers that can only happen because of like it being related. So like we can measure our DNA and see how far apart we are genetically and where our ancestors came from. And it could just be by chance that random mutation caused it to look like we're related, but no, it's because that's just how evolution works. We can say, yes, you have this ancestry, I have this ancestry, this is how far apart we are. We use the exact same metric to measure how far apart we are from apes and that we have a common ancestor. Because again, even though it's possible that one retrovirus injected both our species at the same time or the same location or whatever, it's not possible that all these markers are like that. It's not physically possible for that to occur. So we know for a fact that we are direct descendants of the primordial apes. We are apes. We literally apes. But yes.
Yeah, I don't think that. First of all living beings have virtually the same DNA, including me.
No.
I mean, we're made up of billions of cells that are similar. And I don't want to go into a scientific conversation about this because I'll admit I'm not up on the science. I would simply note that I doubt if that proves anything. I mean, I think that it just proves that a virus can be caught in the same way by various species, including probably dogs and birds. But I want to move on to it, because you and I aren't going to agree on this. I want to ask you, where do you think moral and ethical rights emanate from? Do you think that's just in nature, or do you think that there's? Well, then what about? Then how do you justify that? I mean, it's just, I mean, it would be natural for me to want to murder someone because they're standing in the way of my getting some benefit. I mean, if we're all going to be a society that's based on our own understanding of morality, then we're going to not have an organized society. Society is organized on 3 pillars: science, which is the understanding of the natural world and what it is and what it means; civics, which is the understanding of organizing human societies through governments and through organizations and through family; and finally, spirit, which is the idea that there is a source of all of this that is outside of the manipulation of human beings who are imperfect.
Well, I mean, that's the third one there is just false. Like there are societies of people who have no gods. I forget what they're called. There's actually one specific group that's usually brought up as having no god, and so the third one's just false. You don't need that one at all.
Well, we're going to go back over this again because what I would contend is whether or not they believe in God doesn't negate the idea that there is a God. I mean, yeah, you have.
It negates the idea that it wasn't. So wait. The claim was you claim that societies group based off of these 3 principles, and one of those principles is not required for societies to group, so it proves your statement false that
No,
societies
it's not
group.
required for them to believe in it. It doesn't mean it's not true. We've already gone over. I mean, look, let's not get on a merry-go-round here. My contention is that whether you believe in something or not, whether something is happened, you contend it happened or not, it either happened or it didn't. So there either is a God or there isn't a God, whether or not any person or group believes in it.
Yeah, but that's a separate topic. So you made the claim, you made a causal claim. Societies group based off of these three principles. Societies grouping are completely independent of whether or not God exists. Societies group all over the world. They can group if there's God, they can group if there's no God. Do the societies group together? When they group together, do they require these three things? The answer is no, they do not require these three things. These are not required for societies to group together. And so it's a completely independent question to whether or not God exists. That's a separate question.
Well, look at first of all, again, I would contend that God either exists or doesn't, whether or not people recognize it. But if you're going to tell
Sure.
me that a society can organize without believing in God, then I guess my question to you is, what do they believe in? Hitler, Stalin?
No, they just believe in nature. What is the?
Oh, okay. So when you say believe in nature, how do they think ideas of moral and ethical code emanate?
I haven't researched them culture, but they don't need a God for that. So like, I don't.
Well, they may not need to recognize a God for that, but the point is that if you don't have an external supernatural source of these ideas, which is what Thomas Jefferson talked about when he talked about the creator giving rights, then you're going to have, and this is something G.K. Chesterton wrote about very brilliantly in the early 20th century, that if you don't believe in a creator, if you don't believe in God, then you're going to be prone to believe in not just anything, but you're going to be attracted to the idea of believing in the dictates of a superior, not superior, but empowered elite group of people that are usually headed up by
it's a false assumption. No,
worship.
You keep making this. If you don't have a God, you'll believe in Hitler. Like, no, that's literally false. Most atheists believe, like most philosophers are atheists. 70-something%. Phil Survey's paper 2020. You can check the data. There's a poll on it. Most philosophers are also moral realists. They believe in objective morality that is true, independent of all human groups. So it is false when you don't believe in God. You do not default to believing in a superior human group. No, that's not the case.
Well, where do these philosophers believe that moral objectives emanate?
Lots of places, but it doesn't matter where they believe it. They don't believe what you're saying. What you're saying is false.
No, it matters where they believe morals and ethics emanate from. And by the way, our experience in civilization has evolved, where there is evolution, by the way, in terms of our understanding moral and ethical precepts. Like, for example, early civilizations felt that it was okay to sacrifice human beings in order to appease an earthly god, a god that they set up, usually by the state, an idol. And we now have evolved to the point where we understand that that's not moral. That didn't just happen in nature.
Yes, it literally did. That's literally a thing that happened in nature.
No, nature would say you can kill people because it helps you.
No,
Yes.
No, it doesn't.
We basically.
No, it doesn't.
It certainly does. It would help.
No. Again, there could just be like so. Snake's in a super chat. Thank you, Snake, for the super chat. He says, "Whatever truth governs God's morality will exist in nature in a universe without God." So if you think God has a morality, you can just say, "Okay, that's a law of physics. You don't need the God. Like literally anything God can do can be done in a universe without God. You don't. It's just logically necessity that if God can do it, you can do it without God. So it is false to say that. Well, if there's no God, there's the nature just says everything's okay. Like, no, it doesn't.
Right.
It's not how it works.
No, I would argue that it does because nature and understanding of science is amoral. Like, for example, science says that nuclear power is a real thing, and it is a real thing. But then you have civics enter the picture saying, well, you can't just build a nuclear bomb in your backyard. And then you have spirit entering into the picture asking, what is the possible deleterious effects of this to human life? Gain of function is another example. The reason President Obama banned gain of function research, not because it wasn't scientific. You probably can transfer a virus from an animal to a human and supercharge it so that it can, be a biological weapon. He did that because civics and morality dictated that we should ban that in the United States. So there was a consensus in our Congress. And that's why you had people like Anthony Fauci. And
I don't care. I don't know why you keep bringing up the politics stuff. It doesn't matter. Wait. You're going off on non-point. You're going on irrelevancies.
I'm simply noting that
go back. You're not. I don't care about politics. None of them matters. None of them matters to the point. You wait. Stop interrupting. Or I'm going to mute you. You made a claim that you can't have morality grounded in nature because science doesn't have anything to do with morality. There can still be another law of physics out there that is the moral law. It can exist in reality just fine, and science doesn't matter to it. But what science does is irrelevant. What?
No, you're right. Science is a different discipline than civics and morality. It's like apples and oranges. My question to you is, does morality therefore exist in science, or is it something else? I mean, where does it come from?
Science is a different field, so it can exist in reality. It can exist in physics. It can exist as a law of nature.
So you're saying that morality is a law of nature?
Yes, it can be.
Well,
yes.
I contend otherwise. I say that the law of nature would be anarchy, because the law of nature is the animal kingdom, which is run by instinct. You can kill, or be killed. I mean, yeah, that's part of human experience. We kill or be killed. That's why we have nations. One of the reasons we have defense. It's one of the reasons why we lock our door. Or we lock the car.
Again, you're confusing the fact that some things in nature are immoral, therefore nothing in nature can be moral. That's a composition division fallacy. No, there could be a law of physics, which is morality, and if it's weak enough, it wouldn't force everything to be moral. Like gravity doesn't force everything to the ground. You can go to space. So there are forces in nature that are weak enough that you can overcome them. So there could be a moral force that's there that affects things, and it's just not strong enough to force everyone to obey it, and therefore you have immoral actions like killing. So no, what you're saying does not follow.
Well, first of all, if you're trying to overcome the laws of nature, then you're in a sense violating not just nature, but you're violating both civics and morality.
No, literally none of that. No.
Doing something that's based on unreality. And let me make the point that the basic function of morality, which comes from the Torah, not literally but figuratively, is that every human life has intrinsic value. That's something that, if you want to just look at this thing as a natural morality, that would not be true. Now, that doesn't mean
that's false. In natural morality, all life has value. Okay, you're wrong on that. Just proved you wrong.
I don't think it in natural. If you separate and remove a moral code from nature, then I don't think that's true. I think that life becomes a commodity, and that that you end up with a civics that decides which life is worth living.
Well, that's actually more like God. So God does that. God literally drowns millions of people. But I don't think you're understanding.
How does God drown millions of people?
The global flood. But I don't think you're understanding the point here. Wait. So I don't think you're understanding the point here. You can make up an invisible sky daddy and you can imagine he does whatever you want him to do. But just like you can make up an invisible sky daddy, naturalists can make up invisible laws we don't know about. They can make up moral laws. Anybody can make up whatever they want to explain the data. Your made-up hypothesis doesn't make the other made-up hypothesis impossible. So just like you keep saying earlier, the fact that you don't believe in it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The fact that you don't believe in a natural morality that gives everyone value doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You have made up a God to explain morality, and just like you have, naturalists can make up a law of nature to explain morality, and they can both explain the data. You can't just say it doesn't exist because you don't believe in it. It's not how it works, as you've mentioned many times in this conversation.
Mm-hmm. All right, so then we're both operating on a system of belief. And what I would note is that the believer in God, at least from a Jewish perspective, doesn't think that God is coming down and doing anything for us. That's something that's that's presumptuous and that's arrogant, because we can't know what God does in the universe or in the world. We can pray and we can mainly reflect and try to determine our own lives, but we can't know that God is doing or not doing anything. But we can point to is that when you have societies that reject the idea that there is a creator of the universe who is outside of human manipulation, and that is the author of the law, as the Torah says, then you do end up with communism and Nazism, which rejected God, which were atheist movements, and which killed hundreds of millions of people.
Again, that's false. So what you're doing is you're taking the worst examples of atheist nations who are a minority and who are not examples of any atheist nations today, and you're saying this is what all atheist nations become if they don't believe in a God. That's, again, a composition division fallacy. That would be like if I said all religious nations lead to the mass murder.
An atheist nation that didn't end up that way?
Yes, all of the ones today. All of the ones today did not end up that way.
No, they're not atheists. I reject
They are
that.
literally atheists. They are literally majority atheist countries.
The United States
No,
is atheist?
you don't. No. The United States is majority religious. Most the countries in Europe are majority atheist countries. They do not end up that way.
I mean, I would argue.
You don't get an opinion on it. It's just facts from all of the data we have on the topics.
Atheists, that they have,
Yes.
Their doctrine is not that they're endowed by a creator.
I don't care about their doctrine. I care about the individuals. The individual people are atheists and they don't turn out like Hitler. The people themselves are majority atheists and none of them turn out like Hitler. You are generalizing
Not so
from
far.
a few. Yes. And
I mean, how long has Europe been majority atheist?
for longer than Hitler and Stalin were around. So
I don't think so.
it's again, this isn't something you don't get to think about this. It's a fact from data.
I don't know.
You're evading the point here. So you're just interrupting and not letting me finish the point. You are generalizing from a few bad atheists and saying all atheists lead to Hitler. That is objectively false. Everybody in sociology, everybody in history says that's just bullshit. That's a bullshit theist argument that no one accepts in any academic field. But it's the same thing as if I said, oh, look, some religious people fly planes into buildings. Therefore, if you're religious, they will all fly planes into buildings. Like, clearly, that's not the case. There are bad examples of atheists, yes, and there are bad examples of religious people, bad examples of Christians all over the world. The fact that there are some bad people who adhere to an ideology does not mean the ideology leads to those bad people. In fact, if we look at the data, the vast majority of atheists are the least violent, least criminal, most educated, most peaceful, most engaging, most accepting groups ever in the history of the world. We have data on all of these. The people who are the atheists are the best human beings to have ever lived on the planet. If you're a theist, you're more likely to be intolerant, you're more likely to be violent, you're more likely to be criminal, based on all of the stats we have in the world. So based on what we know about everything in reality, it's the opposite of what you're saying. Atheists are more tolerant and more peaceful. Were there some bad ones? Yes. Does that mean that the atheism necessarily leads to being Hitler? No, that's been factually proven false by all of history. So no, what you're saying is that some atheists were bad, therefore all atheists will necessarily lead to bad stuff, is wrong. It's the same as if I said some Christians kill people, therefore if you're a Christian it will lead to you killing people. Also not the case. It's a composition division fallacy. We can look at the data, and the data shows the atheist countries are the most peaceful, most accepting, most kind, best community, most educated in the world.
I'm not saying that all atheists are going to be bad. I'm saying that atheist movements like Nazism and communism and now
humanism, atheism, agnosticism, all of every single atheist movement in America right now, you're saying is going to become Hitler because.
No. I mean, I'm talking, maybe I'm projecting here, but I'm pointing out that the great atheist movements of the 20th century, starting with the French Revolution and communism and Nazism.
None of those had to do with atheism. Those are political movements.
They had
Again,
everything to do with atheism.
No, they didn't.
Very explicitly.
No, nowhere in atheism does it say kill people. That's not a doctrine in atheism. That's a doctrine in.
I didn't say atheism is a doctrine that says kill people, but look at your history. Those were atheistic movements who rejected.
No, your history is more bloody. Religion has killed more people than atheism. Again, you're comparing some atheists.
Well,
nothing to do with atheism.
I want to reject that. It's not some atheists. It's atheist movements. Now, that's some atheists. You can't say, but there are thousands. There are thousands and thousands of atheist movements. None of them are violent today. The point is that you're quite right to note that there have been Christian movements that have killed people. My contention here is that, firstly, we are fallen beings, we're imperfect beings, and that when that has happened in Christian history, that has been a diversion away from the basic Christian doctrine. It has been an anomaly, and it has been, in a way, anti-Christian. And I would argue that the United States ultimately, in our own imperfections, has been the best flowering of a Christian civilization. Whereas atheist movements, like Nazism, like communism,
those aren't atheist movements. Those literally are not atheist movements.
Yes,
those are communist and fascist movements.
They were atheist.
Yeah, they also didn't play golf. They were non-golfers. The non-golfer movement of Hitler. If you don't play golf, you're gonna end up like Hitler. That's what you're saying. That's how ridiculous and dumb what you're saying is. Hitler didn't do something.
I'm talking about these movements that rejected God and that sought to create an earthly utopia based upon science and based upon their.
Well, no, they rejected science
of how man should be.
They both rejected science.
Reject science.
They literally did. So wait.
Part of this movement, the 19th century movement called scientism.
No, they were not. They were not. So stop. There's too much you've already said that's already wrong. We got to go back. So Russia rejected science. They adopted Lysenkoism, which caused the starvation of millions of people. They rejected science. They didn't accept science.
They rejected real science.
Yes,
but
so did Hitler. So they were not scientific movements. They were not scientific movements. They were fascist and communist movements. This had nothing to do with atheism. Atheism is a lack of something. Atheism. Stop interrupting. Stop interrupting. Let me finish. Atheism was a lack of something. It is not an actual belief system. It is not a motivation of anything, which means cannot ever logically be the cause of what Hitler or Stalin did. The cause of what they did has to be their positive beliefs. So saying they're atheist movements is saying like they're non-golfers. It's a non-golfer movement because they didn't golf. That is the dumbest thing imaginable, because obviously the fact that Hitler didn't golf was not a motivation for any of his actions. The fact that Hitler did not believe in a God is not a motivation for any of his actions. You can't label a group as being one of the things they didn't do. It has to be something that positively motivates them. Was Hitler positively motivated by the fact that he did not golf? No, that's a stupid argument. Also, he wasn't positively motivated by the fact he didn't believe in a God. He was positively motivated by his belief in bigotry and fascism. Those are the causes of his beliefs, not the atheism. You cannot call them atheist movements because atheism isn't a motivating factor, just like non-golf isn't a motivating factor. It's just literally logically incoherent.
By replacing belief in a God that is an outside of their manipulation of morality and replacing God with themselves as a utopian earthly movement that would create a one-world utopia, they were in the de facto running on the assumptions of atheism. You're right, atheism itself is just that there's no God, it's a non-belief, that everything is just natural, we're just a bag of bones. But the fact that they rejected the understanding of a God and replaced it with themselves is what made them and what animated their movement. They felt they could evolve humanity. Hitler thought he could evolve the human species by creating a superior species called the Übermensch. The communists felt they could evolve the human species through social and political change by murdering the bourgeoisie and by murdering 50 million people in China. And by the way, they're still around, they're in China. The point is that their movements, they're not atheists in the positive sense that atheism is a thing, it's not. But they rejected God and they replaced God with themselves as an earthly movement. To a certain extent, Islam does this as well. Although they do believe in God, they still believe that they need to create this one world to reflect the one God, and they feel commanded to do it through arms and through violence and through political oppression. Whereas the Judaic understanding of belief in God is that it's a personal relationship, it's a personal belief, and that is also the Christian understanding. Now, again, there have been deviations from that, but they are moving away from that belief. Whereas with communism and Nazism, that was the belief that man could control the universe and transform the human species into a superior species. And the only way to do that, because it's untrue and it's unnatural, is by force.
Okay, so the fundamental premise that seems to be wrong here is that you think that the ability to improve humanity is the motivating factor that leads to genocide or something like that.
No, the ability to do it without belief in God and a moral code the idea that God can be replaced by a group of people who have this arbitrary idea that they can improve humanity is unnatural. Actually, it runs against the idea that man is created in the image of God and that we have our rights come from God and not the state. That's the idea that now animates transhumanism. They're going to create this new species that's going to combine computers and biological man to create a superior being that will live to be hundreds of years old and that could have cosmic consciousness. That's also the ideas of Blavatsky and the occultists, that they could create this superior species through breeding and through, use of force.
Yeah, it's called liberalism, so as opposed to conservatism. So liberalism is the position that we can improve things. Conservatism is the position we can't improve things.
No, that's not true.
Yeah, it is. So this seems to be your argument here is that let me finish. Don't interrupt.
Sure.
It seems to be your argument that the desire to improve humanity is evil and leads to Hitler.
The desire to improve humanity is good because we can talk about what is true. Rights come from God, not the state. And so the individual can be free to create and improve and develop and invest and invent.
We need trying to go back to the point. I'm trying to identify your point here. So your main point here is that if you don't believe in a God and you think you can improve humanity, that's bad.
Well, first of all, we all, I think that as conservatives and as believers in God, we absolutely believe you can improve humanity. We can repair the world. But the difference is we don't do it by force. We don't do it by requiring people.
None of the atheists today do either.
Personal witness. Hitler did. Stalin
None of
did.
the atheists today do either. There are many atheists all over the world working to improve the world. Stop, don't stop. So wait. So what your claim is that atheists can't want to improve the world without force. That's bullshit. Most atheists who have ever lived have worked to improve the world without force. And then you cherry pick a few bad examples, which are just like me cherry picking the Crusades and the Inquisitions and the slavery done by Christians and saying all Christians are like this. Clearly not. Most atheists want to improve the world without God and have value for all human beings and don't want to do it with force.
The most modern and insidious example of slavery was communist and Nazi. But putting that aside,
which has nothing to do with atheism.
No, well, you brought up slavery. I'm pointing out that most atheists today see themselves and they can improve the world. I'm not disputing that, but you have to still understand the forces of history. You can't exist in a vacuum of today. That was a Marxist idea, actually.
Wait, what do you mean by understand the forces of history? Because it seems like you're saying
history was that atheism was the primary impetus of both the Nazi and communist movement.
How are you comparing that to why do we need to know that today? So like atheists today don't want to force people.
Because you can reduce the possibility that could happen again.
Right. I mean, I agree.
By understanding the dangers of saying that there is no outside force that created morality, but that we as human beings can create morality like Hitler did.
Hitler didn't create morality.
He tried. Well, of course he didn't, but he believed, and the Nazis and the communists believed that they could, and they were commanded to believe that they were superior minds. And
that has nothing to do with morality. He was trying to create superior races, not a moral race. But that
they
doesn't.
believe they were absolutely.
I'm trying to understand your connection here because it seems like you're saying
they're like that. I mean, they believe that they're high moral, holier than thou without God, but they believe that they somehow have come down from Sinai every day to give the world a gift. You can improve the world.
We're getting off track. We're getting off because the main point here seems to be that you think that because some people didn't believe in a God and tried to make the world better, that is a highly likely thing that's going to happen. If you don't believe in God and you try to make the world better, you're going to do it like Hitler did. That is false.
I know. Well, you're projecting in the future. I'm not saying it's happening now, although I think that there are certainly strains of it. I'm not talking about individuals here. I think that an individual atheist absolutely can embrace morality. I point to it as an example, Ayn Rand. She was a hardcore atheist, and yet she certainly claimed that there was a very highly moral identifying morality. I think her atheism was a missing piece in her thinking.
Wait. So I thought your point was that this is bad because it could happen in the future. Like, talking about the past doesn't matter unless it's relevant to the people in the future. So
no, talking about the past is relevant to understanding where we are today and then projecting into the future.
right,
That's what history is. That's why we study history.
right, that's the projection into the future thing is what matters here. So I'm saying that all of the things that can be done with God can be done without God equally or better. And so we don't need a God belief, and we can do all of the things and continue to improve humanity without God and without forcing people. And we don't need to worry about that because we can have morality without God. And so there's no, like,
Okay.
what you're saying doesn't.
Maybe that's true as individuals, Tom, but what
No,
I'm
as
saying
groups.
is,
I mean, as groups, as atheist
no, I would
groups.
argue that as groups, if you study history and you look at atheistic movements and what they did, you can then project possible negative aspects to a present situation where there's a rejection of a superior being.
So which of the 10 million atheist groups today do that?
What do you mean 10 million atheist groups? I mean,
The Atheist Alliance, the Universal Unitarian Church, the Humanist Organization, the ACA. Which of the atheist groups today are doing that?
They're not doing it today.
Oh, wait, that defeats your entire point then.
No, because I do think that there are trends in those groups that are pretty intolerant, frankly. But
of silly Christians?
Yes, I do. But also, I would contend that you need to watch them in terms of their authoritarian nature and their ability and their desire to control all aspects of our life and our society. They want to control our healthcare. They want to control our welfare. They want to control our means of production, our economy. There's this nanny state thing that I think is atheistic because it runs against human nature.
Well, so everything you just described is what Christians are doing. So Christians are doing all of those things, and we need to watch.
Actually, those are more atheistic movements. I'm not saying Christians aren't involved in it, but that has been an atheistic trend.
No, I'm talking about the Christians who literally want to ban abortion, who control our physical health, to stop giving money to charity, to abolish healthcare because it should be given by the churches. Wait. So everything you said applies to Christians. Now, I agree we should watch all movements to prevent authoritarianism because it's bad, but that applies equally and more so to Christian movements than it does to atheist movements, because Christian movements are more authoritarian and have been throughout all of history than atheist movements. Some of the atheist movements have been bad. Most of them have not. Most of the Christian movements have been bad. Some of them have not.
Well, first of all, Christian movements and religious movements are not anarchists. And the idea, questions of life and death in any society transcend religion. They get to whether or not you should have euthanasia or abortion or suicide, or all of these questions. Every society, historically and today, grapples with those questions. Yes, Christians do tend to support life, whether it be being against the death penalty or being against killing the unborn child. That's true. But those are basic functions of any society, and they transcend any particular religious group. And there's also plenty of I suppose, atheist groups that are not big fans of aborting babies either. I don't know. I mean, those issues are transcendent. They deal with life. But
that seems to apply to your argument as well. So yes, movements want to do things that are important to societies. All of them, Christian movements, atheist movements, they all want to.
But the point is that some of them do so that is consistent with the moral code that says that every man is created in the image of God and woman. And that includes the unborn, and that includes, death penalty, and it includes all of those questions.
Yes.
The basic function of a society is to protect the weakest minority, the most vulnerable minority, and that's the individual, and to protect children from, prurient things and things that they're not mature enough to understand. Either they're not physically or emotionally well developed. A moral society protects their children, the innocence of their children, so they can grow up and become self-directed and sovereign individuals under God.
Yes. So one group makes decisions based off a made-up belief that has no basis in reality, and one makes decisions off of the belief that all humans are valuable and deserve respect. And so it seems like the one that
that about sizes it up, Tom. Actually.
Yes. So the atheists who make decisions based off of human respect and evidence and valuing human
No, I
beings
think
seem to be
the
the better
other
one.
way around. I would flip that coin the other way around, quite frankly. You know, those who consider, you know, the basic, what we've learned from thousands of years of trial and error, and what we've learned from the idea that rights come from outside of the state, are those who advocate things like life and things like preserving the innocence of children and property and the
Well, wait,
sovereignty.
so funny you bring that up. Marty Mad Scientist has had a super chat. Did atheists steal children from homes of Indians and torture them in residential schools? No, that was Christians. That was 100% Christians.
No, that was that was wrong, and it was a deviation. But atheists are stealing children from homes now. Some of these welfare agencies, like here in Massachusetts, they show up usually on a Friday night, and
those are government organizations. If you're saying this is a Christian nation, those are Christian organizations.
No, they're not Christian. They're part of the secular atheistic movement that has put that kind of power and authority into the state.
You're contradicting yourself. If you're saying that this is a you said earlier, this is like the best example of a Christian nation. That's a government organization, so it's a part of the Christian organization. And now it's atheists because it's doing the bad thing you don't like, even though it's Christian.
We are a Christian nation, but our government since the election of 1912, and I get into this in one of my books, has moved in the direction of socialistic, atheistic organization that doesn't reflect the average American at all. And that is involved with more authoritarianism and more centralized power in a federal and even increasingly an international governance.
You seem to not understand that. Wait. You just seem to not understand that all of the child organizations, adoption organizations, those states that take away kids, that's all run by Christians. They're Christian bias. They're run by Christians with Christian bias. No. They're run by Christians, and we know they're run by Christians because they don't give kids to gay families at a much lower rate. They're run by Christian bigots.
I'm talking about the state agency here.
Which are Christian. Which are the Christian? The ones taking away kids are the Christians.
How is the state of Massachusetts Christian? I mean, the state government itself. It's not motivated by Christianity. I can assure you. It is
the organizations.
It's not an organization. It's a state agency. There's a difference between that. A private organization that doesn't want to place a child in a gay family, that's their right as a private organization. And there are other organizations that do. That's competition. That's the free market.
No, that's bigotry. That's illegal. That's literally illegal.
Says who?
The government.
Why should the government tell a private adoption? I mean, as it is in Massachusetts, Catholic Charities had to shut down because they wouldn't do those placements. I would argue that whether or not they're right or wrong in that, that's their right as a private organization. The state should not interfere with that. You know, if someone a gay couple wants to adopt a child, there are plenty of adoptive agencies that will place the child. That's competition. They have a right to do that. That's religious freedom.
No, that's slavery. So when it has to do with kids' lives, the goal of adoption is to help kids live better lives. And we know scientifically, we have all the studies to show that gay marriage families do help kids live better lives, and foster parents live better lives. But when they're actually in the adoption system, they don't live better lives, and so it's bigoted to not give them to families.
I tend to agree with you on this, but I only point out that we have in this country, we respect the concept of private rights of organizations, whether they be church organizations,
except when it kills and hurts people.
And that's right, and no one's killing anybody
kids
by saying that they're not going to do. No, because you could go to the organization down the street that will.
No. If an organization will not give children to a family who will help the child live a better life, they are harming the child. So if
go to one that does, that's competition.
No, you're not understanding. So if an organization will not give kids to families, then that organization is hurting the kids. And so that organization is evil and needs to be disbanded by the government because it's harming the children.
Very authoritarian. First of all, again, an organization.
It's not authoritarian to destroy companies who harm kids. That's just basic human rights.
Kids. They are saying, go down the street. Do you think a hospital should be forced to perform abortions?
If it's medically necessary, yes.
What if it's not medically necessary?
If it's not medically necessary,
it's my constitutional right, and you have to give me one.
Well, as far as I know, As far as I know, or pregnancy qualifies as great bodily harm, so it's always medically necessary.
All right, well, I disagree with you. I think it's a choice that a hospital can make. Now, if a woman wants an abortion and this hospital says we don't perform abortions unless your life is at risk, you're going to die unless you have one. You can go down the street to another hospital, which will. That's competition. That's part of. I mean, you seem to not understand that this is the private. This is free market. This is the natural system that Adam Smith talked about, the hidden hand of the marketplace, which is part of a moral society. You have a right to offer your services. Does the government have a right to tell any business you have to do? In other words, it's a voluntary thing. They're not killing anyone. You have a right. They're offering their services in their way, and you have a right to select them, just like they'll select what kind of candy you're going to buy. You go to a supermarket, you pick which kind of soap you want to use. That's how the free market works.
Yes, so that's why we have laws against doing that, like discrimination against sex and race and different kinds of groups, because if we allow just the free market, certain groups will be seen as the out group and get less resources and be in poverty for hundreds of years.
No, I think that if we have the free market,
economics.
Everyone will find their own way of conducting. Look, I mean, I'm speaking here, by the way, as a Jew, who my late father, he wanted to join a yacht club, and he had a boat. And the yacht club here in Boston was anti-Semitic. They didn't let Jews join. So what happened? The Jews opened their own yacht club, and it ended up becoming one of the best yacht clubs in New England. And that's how the free market works. I'm not condoning the fact that this yacht club would not allow Jews. Eventually they did, because they had to accept visitors. But the thing is, the way the free market works is that you open up your own thing, and you do your own thing, and the market eventually corrects itself, because society will eventually become more accepting. You don't use the government to force people to do it. That's not the way we do. It's not the way. It has not traditionally been the American way.
Yes, it literally has been. That's why all of the laws are in place against anti-bigotry and anti-racism. Because if you can't fire someone because they have different political beliefs or whatever. So bigotry against positions is also illegal. And religious bigotry against you can't fire someone on religious grounds. I don't like you, so whatever. But the point here is that if
what about firing a Trump supporter? I could speak to that one.
Not anyways. Wait. So if you going back to your point about the free market. So the free market, if the government doesn't force people to allow different groups who aren't the out group, whoever it is, to be accepted, then they will be placed behind everyone else. They will literally lose money and lives and starve.
That didn't happen. And it doesn't have to happen, because people find their own way, and they accomplish based on their
No, they die and starve to death. They don't find their own way. Nature kills you. Nature kills you very quickly. So we need to give people equal opportunity.
In this country, usually we have tended, look, we're not a perfect society. This is not a utopia. But in America, we have tended to value accomplishment and merit, not whether or not someone is of a particular background. I'm not saying that it's always perfect, but this is the first society in history that honors entrepreneurialism, individual small business, and all of these entities, and that people can create their own business. The fact that you have a business on the street that says, well, we don't like you, that's not stopping you from creating a business and finding one that does. That's my point.
Yes, it literally does. So again, you don't seem to understand how economics works. If a group of people are denied access to resources, their group cannot grow at a substantial rate compared to other groups, and so they're discriminated against. The point here is that we need to allow them the same access to basic resources so their group can grow. No, it is not okay to deny them resources just because of the free market. We need to give them access to the same resources.
Well, first of all, I agree with you. It's not right to do that. And I do think that, again, I'm not an anarchist. I think it's appropriate if somebody opens their business to the public and they say, we're selling cakes, they have to let everybody come in, as long as they set standards that apply to everyone, not just one group. But that doesn't mean that therefore you can tell that cake maker how to make their cake. that's something that they retain the right to. Or you can tell an artist how they're to paint their picture.
Yeah, I don't care about artists and cakes. I care about banking loans and redlining districts and not giving people job opportunities or education or funding. I care about the real things that actually matter here, the ones that people are actually like affect the lives of many minority groups in the country.
Well, things like redlining, the reason they got away with that in Boston was because they used the government to do it. You know, if the private sector had worked, that wouldn't have happened. I mean,
It literally happened in many of the private sectors. Many of the private sectors have literally done this, where they use redlining and are still using redlining today.
I understand that, but if a private sector group says, "Oh, we don't want to invite Black people or something," you know,
They do that. They literally do that.
I know they do it, and it's wrong. But the point is, the way the free market works is that if they're not using the power, you know, when it becomes a problem, it's when they use the power of the government to enforce that. Either way, and if they're doing it, if you have like a private group that says, "Well, we only want Jews, or we only want Christians, we only want atheists," that's it, even though you and I might think that's wrong, that's their right. It's your right to form an atheist club and not invite a Christian. What if a Christian wants to join your atheist club and they said, "Well, you're violating my right. I want to become president of your club." You have a right to say, "This is for atheists, and we're not, you know, this isn't for you." And they can form their own group.
Clubs are not the same as like housing and businesses. You're making a false equivalency here between a club, a private club, and people selling homes. Like, yes, people selling homes will not sell them to Black people because they don't want them in the community to depreciate the prices of their homes that they're selling because of bigotry, which is why we have laws against that.
We both agree that's wrong, but it becomes more of a problem when the government comes in and interferes, because if you let the private sector work, you would eventually have Black people buying homes in that area because they can, because they become financially able to, and those kinds of barriers gradually go away.
No, they don't.
Yes, they do.
The discrimination causes them to get worse, not go away. Snake, thank you for the super chat. Religion, more than any other philosophy, offers the best excuse to kill the ungodly. Hitler promoted theism, creationism, and admired Islam. Yes, he did.
He did admire Islam. That's true. Islam
and
is
promoted God, polytheism, believed in God. Yes.
No, they were atheistic. They were New Age pagans, which went before.
Pagan means believe in God.
No, pagan means believe in idols, believe in
gods that you don't believe in. So he believed in gods that weren't your gods.
It's not. Yeah, but it's not the supernatural God. It's an earthly God. It's a man-made God.
No, I don't know of any of those kinds of gods. I don't. That's literally the opposite of God.
That's the animating principle of paganism, that man can be like God.
No, it's not. I know many pagans. That's not it. That's literally not it. Like Ocean is a friend of mine. He has his own YouTube channel. He's literally a pagan. That's not what pagans believe.
Well, maybe I should interview him. What do pagans? I mean, I'll admit I don't know a lot about what pagans now believe in. I know what they believed in the Bible, which was graven images.
Well, they didn't believe that in the Bible either. That was just what Christians said about them. But
the Jews said about them, and that's what the Torah says. That they worshipped graven images. They worshipped man-made, state-run gods. The state was the god, basically. Julius Caesar in Rome was like a god man. Augustus Caesar referred to him as a son of God. They believed that human beings were gods. They believed that idols were gods. I mean, they set up statues of Zeus. That is a graven image. They believed and they worshipped those, and that those were run by the state.
The image of Zeus isn't Zeus. The image. So, like you setting up a cross in a church and worshiping the cross, it's an image of your God.
No, that's untrue.
That's literally the same thing. So when they set up it, wait. So when they set up statues of Zeus, they did not literally think the statue was Zeus.
Yes, they obviously
did. No.
They worshipped it as a god. Whereas a cross in a church, you're not worshiping the cross. The cross is just a symbol that helps you understand God.
That's literally the same in both. That's literally the same thing.
No,
there's literally no difference.
My source on this is James Carroll, the author of the Sword of Constantine. He's a former priest. He's a professor at BU. He talks about that these images in a Catholic church, for example, of Mary and of Jesus and of the cross, they're not. When you go to a church, you're not worshiping those images. They're just there to help you get into the mood of worshiping God.
Which
They're
is the
not
same.
worship-
Which is the same. So,
No,
so
it's
wait,
not
wait,
the
what the pagans believed that the gods could come to those statues and inhabit them and speak to you. They didn't believe the statues were literally the gods. It's dumb. Like, obviously, no
well,
one
that's
thought that there was like
statue.
a Zeus in each little building. Like,
Yeah, but
oh, there's a
that's-
Zeus and there's a Zeus.
Okay, Tom, but that's a lot different than the idea of simply having a representative to remind you that there is a transcendent God that is separate from man, that is supernatural.
That's literally the same thing. Christians
No,
think that God comes to them too.
We're on a merry-go-round here. Why don't we move to another thing?
Oh, my
I disagree. Christianity does not worship idols.
I want to run through the super chats that I didn't read because I was distracted. Snake was right. Nature can't do math, so does math isn't real?
Math, no, math actually, I mean, in my book, God is God, which I could just mention, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I don't care.
That's my book. I basically suggest that there's evidence of God because of mathematics and the principle of zero, which was something that is the underpinning of the theory of arithmetic, and that is that the symbol zero represents nothing, whereas any other symbol, whether it be positive or negative, represents a thing. 1, 2, 3, etc. -1, -2 is a projection that eventually becomes a thing. So how is it then in nature that you can create something out of nothing? Because the mathematical equation is 0 cannot become something. 0 plus or 0 minus 0 is 0. So if you cannot create something out of nothing in an abstract sense using mathematics, then there had to have been a moment in history, however it happened, where something was created out of nothing. And the only way that could have happened was by what we call God.
Okay, that didn't make any sense. So you're saying that because we imagine a zero, which is a lack of an object, that means that the universe must not have existed?
How do you create something out of nothing?
You can't. You don't. That's never happened.
That's right. That's right. Which is why there had to. Then how did the Earth come about? Because the Earth is something.
Because nature always existed. There was always a thing in nature.
So then it's eternal. Then
yes.
I mean, this is okay. I mean, that's a belief. That's Eastern religions claim that. The New Age claims that.
Physics claims that. Like all of the physicists.
No, it doesn't claim that.
Yeah, yes, it does.
Liebknecht didn't. The point is that the Judaic idea is that the Earth was created. The universe was created. Before the universe, there was no universe, and that God is the vehicle, of supernatural vehicle that somehow made this possible.
That's still not creating something from nothing. If God already existed, then he's creating something from himself. Like for nothing to exist, that means God couldn't exist either.
God created something out of nothing.
No. God, if God existed, something existed, right? Right. If God existed, something existed.
Yeah, but the Earth and the universe was created by God.
That's fine. That's fine. But that's not something from nothing. So nothing literally means no things exist, including God. So nothing would be not God.
We're getting into now a very important kind of metaphysical question, which is what is God? And that's something that as natural beings, we can't perceive fully. It's a mystery. I'm willing to leave it at that. We don't know what God is. What we do
is he a something?
We don't know that. Probably, I have no idea. I'm not, what am I, The point is that the Judaic understanding, and it's not presented as proof, is that the universe and the earth and man was created out of nothing, that there was nothing, then there was a creation, it was a big bang, if you like, and then you had something. Because
so is God nothing? Is God nothing?
God is both nothing and everything. It's hard to explain. It's beyond our comprehension. Can you accept, Tom, that there might be some things that are beyond human comprehension?
God is nothing. Atheism is true.
No,
because that's what atheists say. Atheists say God is nothing.
I'm saying that what God is a mystery that's beyond our ability to comprehend. Because we're humans, because we live in the natural world. And if God is supernatural, it's beyond our comprehension. And I accept that.
Well, I think that's different from nothing. Something that something we can't understand is something, and nothing is something else.
Look, do you accept the idea that there are going to be things that the human mind and the human being will never be able to completely perceive?
Yes, but they must be something. There must be something that we can't understand.
Not necessarily. We don't know what they are. because we can't perceive it. You're engaging in a contradiction here. If you can't perceive it, you don't know if it's something or nothing. It's just beyond our perception.
If
It's
it's
a mystery.
nothing means it does not exist. So if there's something which we can't understand, which is nothing, then it does not exist.
No, it's just something beyond whether existence or non-existence. It's something we cannot perceive.
But
That's what I said.
something we can't perceive.
You can perceive it, then you're engaging in a fallacy if you say you can perceive God.
No. I'm saying that if something exists which we can't understand, like absolutely, there's many things we can't understand, and they exist. They are still something. They are a thing that exists. They are some meaning we don't know, thing meaning existing object. So they are something we don't understand, which exists. That is the opposite of no thing. No thing is a non-existent object. So no thing means nothing. Nothing means it does not exist. So there cannot be an object which exists, which is nothing, because those are contradictions.
Well, look, you're using a rational mind here, and you're using it quite well. But the idea of a God is something that is beyond the natural, rational ability to perceive. That's why it's God. It is outside of nature. It created nature according to Judaic understanding. And that the world is the creator of the universe and the giver of the law. It's something that happened beyond our ability to perceive. And to suggest that we can perceive it, I think, is a form of arrogance. I mean, we don't know, but we do know from the mathematical equation that you cannot create something out of nothing. I would argue, and it's my belief, I can't prove, that something that created something out of nothing, or whatever it is, can only be explained by a supernatural event, by God. Because you cannot create something out of nothing. Zero cannot become one. There's no way. Zero is zero. Nothing is nothing.
Yeah, so I agree. You can't create something out of nothing. But my position would be is that there was a necessary natural thing that's always existed that created the universe, and it doesn't have a mind of any kind. It's just a physical force, an unguided physical force.
Well, we disagree on that. I don't believe the universe is eternal. I think the universe is created. I think the earth was created. I don't know how it happened. I'm not claiming to know, but I believe that is what happened. And I think that from that, man was created in that image of God, and that we have a purpose in the world. What that is something that we can explore within ourselves, but we have to do it with the understanding that we're not gods. We're images of God, so we're imperfect, and we see things through a cloudy lens. We cannot know all truth. That was the sin of the Garden of Eden, that Adam and Eve felt they could become as God by partaking of the forbidden fruit. Now, I'm looking at that metaphorically, not literally, that by doing so, by taking a bite of the forbidden fruit, they could replace God in heaven with themselves as the all-knowing beings. And that has been the sin of that's occurred in every generation, that man can become like God because there is no God. They can become transcendent. They can have supercosmic consciousness, and thus they become superior and have some kind of a moral right to bring other people into that come hook or crook, including maybe getting rid of people who disagree.
Okay, we've been going for an hour and a half. Appreciate you coming on. Thanks.
I appreciate it too, Tom.
Did you want to give a shout out to any of your books or where people can find you?
Well, my program, charlesmoscowitz.com, is broadcasting live Monday through Friday, 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Standard Time. You can go to my website, charlesmoscowitz.com. My books are available at Amazon. Just look them up under my name. I've written almost 20 books. Most of my books deal with politics and culture and economy. And only recently have I started to write about the spiritual things. Tom, I really appreciate you having me on. Great guy. Thank you very much, Tom.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Really enjoyed the conversation, and I will let you go. I'm going to start the after show, so you can just close the screen whenever you want.
All right. Thanks a lot.
See you later.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
All right, guys, after show. Anybody would like to give their comments, review of what